before we get started, we have a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about with risk-based testing today. We're going to talk about the how, the why, some benefits of them. We're going to go through some examples, some different tools that you guys can utilize. We have a lot of great stuff for you today. But the first thing I'm going to do is give a little bit of background on Tabby and I. So my name's Christina Adair, as you said, Tabby Jones. And we're coming to you from Jackson, which is just right around the corner here. Took us like 5 minutes to get here, which is nice. We're both in the Jackson Enterprise Technology Department there, where we have been for the majority of the time that we've been at Jackson. We actually just realized that we've both been at the company for roughly 12 to 13 years, which I thought was pretty cool. We also are part of the Testing Center of Excellence, which is an internal group that we have with our department that focuses on anything to do with testing. So we create standards, we create best practices, we have peer review processes for our testing. It's a really great group. We do a lot of great things, and we've both been a part of that group for quite a few years now, so we're pretty proud of it. Another thing I want to mention is that our company is currently going through a transition period right now. So we're transitioning from a more waterfall methodology to a more agile methodology, which we know a lot of people have either gone through that transformation or are going through that transformation. So we wanted to make sure that with our presentation today that we highlight risk-based testing in both a waterfall and an agile methodology to make sure that you get the best of both worlds, I guess you could say. So I want to back up a little bit and talk about why risk-based testing. Why did we start researching it? What was the need there? So last year, as part of the Testing Center of Excellence, we had an initiative that we had to better prioritize our tests. And there was a couple of reasons why we decided to do that. One was that we were getting a lot of pushback from our business partners and our development partners on testing everything. And as most of us know, we can't always test everything, nor should we always test everything. So we wanted to have a better tool to have those conversations about what should we really be testing versus what we should be holding off on testing. And the other piece of that was when we started looking into why we were prioritizing or how we were prioritizing our test cases, we didn't have a consistent process, or we weren't having all the same criteria or even the right criteria that we were considering when determining priority. For example, we found that we had some test cases where they were marked as critical just because it was a multi-day test and people wanted to make sure that got executed first, not necessarily that the functionality that we were testing was the most critical functionality that we should be looking into. So for all of those reasons and more, we said, let's go look out at industry standards and see what people are doing to prioritize their tests. And we came across risk-based testing. And from all the research we did, we thought that that would be the right approach for us. And it looks like we're already on the next slide, which is what is risk-based testing? So risk-based testing is a software testing approach which is used to prioritize tests based on the risk associated to the business and the technical impact. So essentially, you're using risk analysis to benefit the entire testing process. So that includes test planning, test design, and test execution. You may be thinking, maybe you're already prioritizing your tests today, so why are we doing risk-based testing? Why are we prioritizing again? Is it a separate priority? Is it the same priority? It's not a separate priority, but it should be the main driving factor into how you're prioritizing your overall. The difference is the criteria that you're utilizing to determine what the priority should be, and risk should be at the forefront of that. Tabby is actually going to go into more detail about what those business and technical considerations are in a little bit, but first I want to go over some of the benefits of risk-based testing. So one is improved quality. So all the critical functions of the applications are tested. So we're just putting more of a focus on that area. Fail and fix fast. So executing tests in risk order gives the highest likelihood of discovering defects in severity order. Also, another benefit is reduced testing. So potential to descope low value tests. So we're testing less potentially, but more efficient and more robust testing. And then measure testing by risk, which is my personal favorite benefit of this. So we're used to talking about test execution as this is the amount of test cases that we've executed, and this is the amount that we have left. So a different metric, or it seems like a better metric to us, is saying this is the level of risk that we've mitigated so far with our testing versus this is how much risk that we still have to mitigate with our testing. And then last but not least, increased customer satisfaction. So this whole process is a very collaborative process to determine what the overall priority should be and based on the business impact and the technical impact. So having that collaboration gives more visibility into the testing efforts and the test strategy, and has allows a more robust test strategy, and has everybody in the end, having the entire project team have more confidence and satisfaction with what is being tested. So, any questions on any of that? All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Tabby, who's going to go over the next couple slides.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tabby. And let me know if you can't hear me, because I feel like I have a microphone in my hand in that it's in the room. So if I'm not loud enough, just let me know, and I will try to speak louder. I'm not a very loud person, honestly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how does RBT work. So the first step in RBT, or risk-based testing, is really the collaboration. It's very important to be successful with using risk-based testing if we collaborate with the business stakeholders and the technical stakeholders. So we want to get either in a conference call, in a room, and talk with the business about their risk on the level of testing that we're doing and the technical as well. So the next step is basically risk analysis, and we can take the business definition and the technical definition and create our considerations from each source. Once we do that, then we can have a good idea and be able to actually assess the risk on our testing and group them by risk. So if you group them by the high priority, we want to execute those first in theory. And it goes back to that increased customer satisfaction that Christina was talking about, because it's a lot better to say we've tested 100% of the high risk test cases versus just we've tested 50% of our testing, because 50% of our testing, what does that tell people? Do you actually find the critical defects? Have you tested the functionality that needs to work to make production useful for either internal or external customers? Do you want to click there for me? Yep. So going into that, the considerations. So for business, there's a lot of different considerations. These are the most common ones that we use at Jackson that we think of, but different projects, different companies might have a multitude of different risks. But the first one for the business side is the functionality. Is it used a lot? Is it critical to get the work done daily? The more that a function is used, the more critical it is. So we want to make sure that's prioritized higher than, say, just a field name or any work that's critical to completing a process in their daily lives. So cost of failure is an important one, because if we test things that won't cost the business or the company any money, then why are we testing it? It's more important to test things that could fail in production and take the work down, and then we have a huge bill at the end of the day. And for us, we put who executes the work up there as a critical factor in risk assessment, because we have a lot of different people working in the company. So we'll have a college student, and we'll have someone who's been there for 20 years. So depending on your level of experience with the system, we try to consider that. If it's being rolled out to all inexperienced users, we want to make sure that they can use it and they have the appropriate training. So the easier it is to use. So basically, if we know that an experienced user is going to be working on it, we increase the risk from the business. Now that goes into also the internal or external impact. So we can have an internal customer that's internal to the company, and external someone using our systems or um, using our applications outside the company. Just wanted to define that a little bit because we've noticed that there's some miscommunication on that when we've had consultants and contractors come to our company. We talk about that. But if it's an internal risk to our daily work, it sometimes can be prioritized a little bit less than an external facing risk or external facing application. We don't want to impact our relationship with our customers or cost that relationship with them or get an angry phone call. So we try to think of how it impacts outside of Jackson and inside of Jackson. That also goes into usability. We want to make sure that the functionality can be used. If it's, sometimes a lot of technical people can use a system very easily, but when you deploy it to someone without that technical background, they don't know how to use it. So we try to take that into consideration and make sure that if this is something that can be used easily by our users, it's a lower risk, but if it's harder for them to use, it's a higher risk. And lastly, we at Jackson are a financial company, so we have to take government regulations into consideration. So we look at the regulatory effect if the project is based on a regulatory change or if it could affect something along the lines of that. We don't want to be sued, and we also don't want to be fined by the government. So we have to take that into consideration when determining our testing. So next, we'll just talk about the technical considerations, and the first key one is resource availability. And when I mean resources, I mean people. We have to ensure that we have the right people and at the right time. If we don't have them, that increases the risk. Or if we have someone that doesn't know how to, or is just learning code, it might need to be tested more than someone that's experienced. Or even if we have an inexperienced tester, that could go into consideration when we're executing our test cases. Next, we have changing requirements. I don't know about everybody but I always have changing requirements, whether I'm on a waterfall or agile project or in between. We constantly are getting requests from the business to change something. We're constantly getting something from the tech leads saying this design isn't right. So we have to manage that. If we know this is a complex requirement, that needs to be a higher risk assessment. And next, we also consider the complexity of the function or the code. If it's a complex piece of code and has multiple dependencies or connects to multiple databases, that needs to change the priority of the risk. So if it connects to 3 different databases, it's probably high risk. If it's a major workflow that has 100 business rules, which is possible at our company, it is, it's a more complex and increases the risk. Which also leads me into the architecture. We like to consider the architecture of the system because sometimes there are older code bases which need to be tested differently. They're higher risk deploying to production versus newer code bases. And it affects the performance of the system as well. So a higher brittle architecture needs a higher risk assessment. And another area of architecture that we need to look at is based on our experience, where do the defects normally happen? If it's a defect prone area, increase the risk of that test case, increase the risk of the test strategy for that area of the system. And if we never have defects on this functionality, why keep testing it? You can say it's a low risk, explain that to the business, explain it to the technical side, make sure everybody's in agreement, and remove it and move on. And lastly, but not least important, is security. Cybersecurity is a huge topic nowadays. And as a financial company, we have people's money at stake, so we have to make sure that we're appropriately taking care of people's information. We call it personal identification information, making sure it's not visible, it can't be accessed, and protecting that. So if it's something that could be hacked or we could give out someone's information, we need to make sure that's a higher risk priority than lower risk. And next slide for me. Now Christina is going to kind of show how we take these considerations into effect and the tools that we use.
All right, so tools. What I mean by tools is some type of helper for actually determining a priority on a test case level. So know that when we say setting a priority in a specific test case, it sounds a little bit more waterfall. But this also can be used in an agile environment as well and can be used with scenarios versus specific test cases. Tabby's going to go over her experiences on her agile team with utilizing risk-based testing in a few here. But overall, we did a lot of research on tools that are out there, and there is a lot of really complex tools to use, and there's a lot of simplistic tools to use. The one I'm going to go over today is more simplistic, but there are risk registers, large spreadsheets that you can put together that have many different factors, calculations, different weighting that can go into considering what the overall risk priority should be for a test case. We made the educated decision to not go that route, and we wanted to start off a more simplistic approach, and we really only wanted to take into consideration two different factors, which is the ones that Tabby has just gone over, which is the business impact and the technical impact. And we used a value of high, medium, and low for each of those. So collaborate together with the project team, determine what each of those values should be, and based on the combination of those values, you would come up with an overall an overall priority, essentially. So the first tool that I'm going to go over today, can you go to the next slide, is a 3x3 grid. So very basic concept. You can do this together as a group, but essentially you're going to take all of your test cases. Like I said, you're going to discuss as a project team what you think the technical impact should be and the business impact should be. You're essentially plotting them on this grid based on the combination of those values. And then you see in the second image here, those quadrants essentially equate out to that overall value or overall risk priority for that particular test case. So you don't get to see the specifics of the test case and the details, but it gives you a good overarching view to say most of our test cases are low, most are medium, most are high. Do we have a good combination of both? Where should we focus on? So it's a good starting point with your team if you feel like this is the only level that you need. The next tool is a more table format, and we've actually found that most people actually prefer this one so far over the first one. It's actually displaying all of the test cases, and there's 3 columns: business impact, technical impact, and then your overall risk value. So essentially, again, you're collaborating, determining what that value should be, high, medium, or low for each of those factors, and then using the key below here to determine the combination of the two, and you can input your overall risk value. So that you can see the detail of your test cases and be able to organize them, filter them to showcase here are all my highs, here are my mediums, here are all my lows. So it's a very simplistic approach. I do want to say, though, that these tools are kind of, I don't want to say a temporary thing for us, but our long-term goal is to be able to have the business impact and technical impact actually inserted into our long-term testing tool application. Therefore, as we're creating the test cases, you would be inputting those values and it would automatically populate the overall priority of the test case based on those values. So we're not there yet. Hopefully we're there sometime this year, but this is what we're doing in the meantime to get everybody up to speed on just the process and getting comfortable with thinking about risk as part of their priority. Does anybody have any questions? All right, so Tabby is going to talk to you about her experiences specifically using risk-based testing in her waterfall projects and her agile projects.
So first I'm going to you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I was chewing.
That's okay.
With the tools, do you guys have to be careful not to use external tools, and because maybe of privacy and security and such, or?
Yeah, we do, especially working at a financial company. These are pretty much spreadsheet based. We can download certain things, but we're not technically allowed to just go download whatever we want. Certain people have rights to do that and certain people don't. So if you don't have rights to download anything, you can't do that. We just try to use what we can. We do know there's other tools out there that are available, and it does depend on the company that you work for, whether you can download a really awesome tool or just use a spreadsheet. But you can make spreadsheets work. I love spreadsheets. So, and Regina's laughing at me because I give her spreadsheets all the time. Yeah, go ahead.
My question was, with this, I'm sure, especially if you have these giant test case databases, right, and you have this list, how has it been like distributing this to the team to get that communication going? Like, how do you basically get the buy-in to have everyone go over it and assess it and kind of like get on board?
It's basically an iterative approach. We only have some people using it. Not everybody is using it yet. And there were some people using it already. We just might not have been using the tools or really communicating it to everybody. So what we've done is we did research on it, found some of these tools. We presented it to our internal testing COE group and go from there. So this is kind of a version of the training, and then we have more Jackson specific things that we want to do with it. Do you want to chime in on that? Is that good?
I think you covered
So it's a little bit easier to use on an agile project because it's smaller amounts of testing at once. But I can say from my waterfall projects that I was always using it. I was always considering the business risks, always using the technical risks. I just might not have been putting it in the spreadsheet or documenting it anywhere. I did try to use it we do have like a priority on our test cases within our test plans and using that as much as I could. But I would work with the business and work with the technical side because I don't want to test things that don't matter. Mm-hmm. Why test it if nobody cares about it or if it's low functionality or low risk functionality? So it was useful. I was on I don't know, was it 3 years, 4 year project? And they wanted me to test everything, or they'd keep coming up with a new thing to test. So instead of just saying, yes, I'll test everything, I decided to say, no, I need to make sure that this is worth my time testing and assess the risk on it. So I would ask the business, like, how critical is this really to you? And then work with my developers and say, is this really complex code? Do I need to test it? Or if it's just a cell update in a table, I don't necessarily need to test that. That might be passively tested when I'm doing other stuff. And it gave me more time to do experience-based testing and exploratory testing, which is more important, honestly, in the long run than just trying to go into a test plan and execute based on those steps. You just kind of look at the step test. You don't pay attention, or at least I didn't necessarily pay attention to the entire system if I'm just testing based off of a test case that isn't important.
Have you heard of minimal essential test strategy, or METS?
I feel like I have.
It's by Greg Pascal. That might be something you want to look into.
That name sounds familiar too.
So.
Thank you.
So basically on the waterfall project, I said this is low risk and I don't want to test it, a little bit more eloquently. And I was able to block or remove the test cases from my test plan and get the buy-in from the business. That's the most important in our projects anyways, depending on your customer. Was there another question before? I was just going to talk about the Agile a little bit. Okay. So in my Agile project, which is still brand new, it's only 2 months, so we've deployed to production about 4 times. But we do write user stories, and that's where we do our risk assessment at. So when we are either writing them, the business puts their risk in there, and then when we're in our backlog refinement in our planning sessions, we make sure all risk is considered from the business side and the technical side, and then we understand we're testing important things based on that. That's basically my experience with Agile still. I'm 2 months new to it, so a little bit, but I'm definitely not an SME yet. So any questions before I give you a little quiz?
Tabby, can you share how your project team is handling, like how their view of risk-based testing is that you've started?
Oh, I did
On that out?
I did forget. we talked about it and we added it to our definition of ready to ensure that we are all talking about it and having conversations around it before we put it into our sprint backlog. Does that answer?
Just if people like it or not. They find it helpful.
I mean, no one's complained yet, and it has not been removed from the definition of ready. So when we do our retros, nobody has brought it up. But I was passionate about it, so I was the one that said we need it and had to argue, and I won. So that was exciting for me, and risk in a financial company is extremely important, no matter what we do. So I just have 2 little examples that I call a quiz, but just to see how we did. So the first example that I kind of came up with is to delete a business rule. It doesn't have any dependencies on it, so we talked to the developers. Does it relate to any other rules? Does it relate to another function in the system? And it's just a simple code change, not low minor issue. So, and then on the business side, we kind of talked about it has a minor external impact because it, so from this perspective, it's a broker dealer that we work with and they want it changed. So, but it's still, we don't do anything with it. It's only a relationship aspect. So it's still considered a low risk. And then there's no internal impact by making this change. So even though I kind of gave the answer away talking about it, which I thought might happen, does anyone want to answer or have a guess if it's low, medium, or high risk?
Low. I think it's low.
I hope so. I hope so.
You're right.
Yeah. I'll try not to give the answer away in the next one. Okay, so one more, just last one, and then if there's more questions, we'll go there. So this example is just updating a whole business workflow. So it does connect to multiple systems and or databases. It is a complex code change. Multiple calls could be made to it during core business hours. And there's frequent usage by the customers. And lastly, it's an internal impact to getting the daily work done. Low, medium, or high? High. Yeah.
Yay.
Good. I mean, then that's good.
There were tough ones, I know.
I know, but I don't think I gave the answer away that time. All right, so I think that's pretty much the end. You guys have any more questions? Any conversations around this? Very into conversations with the agile environment right now. Is there a microphone over there? I think, okay.
So my question is, when you get to the end of your priority list, what happens? Do you ever pick up things that you previously, like assuming you have more time left in the sprint, do you ever pick up items that you initially dismissed as not important enough to test, or what do you do?
In a sprint, no. We find more important work to do. In a waterfall project, if there's time, we would go to the low priority test cases and execute those. And I would say as long as you've done some exploratory testing or experience-based testing first. So we have de-scoped low-value test cases and not, I mean, I've never been in a situation where there was enough time to go back to it. If you have a project like that, I want to know how you work.
You're very lucky.
Yeah.
Seeing as how we've looked at the waterfall and agile, and you mentioned definition of ready, how would that apply trying to use risk-based testing in waterfall?
With the definition of ready?
With trying to include the setting up and making sure that it's part of the actual work. Because in the agile world, you would be able to get definition of ready and be able to get it part of the backlog.
I can take this one. So we're actually also has just recently implemented using template of a test strategy essentially that we're using on all projects, not just waterfall or agile. It might be used in different capacity. That's why I call it a template, because agile teams may use it a little bit differently, but it's essentially trying to make sure you're having those conversations and setting those expectations up front and filling that out as early in the process as possible. So things like definition of ready, definition of done are included in that test strategy. So we're making sure that we're setting those expectations up front. And then as the project continues to go through, we'll update it as things change and we have new tools or whatever it might be. Mhm. Anybody else?
Is there any sign-off process like in the sprint for which tests you're not going to do? So if you pick some low priority ones you're not going to do, does the PO sign off or anyone else from the business?
I think it's a little bit different depending on the project. Some teams have a lot more involvement from the details of the testing. My product owner trusts me, and we just, if there's something that goes wrong, we bring it up. But for the most part, they don't actually look at the details unless I say, hey, this is happening and it shouldn't, or I think this is why it's happening. They don't really pay as much attention now that we're in the agile and we're doing risk up front.
And with some of the projects that are utilizing the test strategy document, they're actually getting approval of it in some capacity. And so up front, we can say going into it, maybe we can say our gut check is that we're going to ensure that we're going to do, all highs and all mediums and most likely going to de-scope lows. And so that's in that document and approved by the project team up front. And then again, if that changes and we have time, we can always adjust it.
It's a really good question.
Yes. Anything else?
All right.
All
Back
right.
over to you to close
You gonna
things
wrap it
out,
up at
or-
all, or?
We do have a bunch of resources, but I know you guys don't want to read that.
Our contact information is on here, though, so if you guys have any other questions that come up, please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to help share our experiences.
Oh.